This is Talking Law with Despina Priala, and if you have a question to do with the law, you're always welcome to send it to us, breakfast@radio97.com.au, and Despina will answer it for you. Now, this morning, Despina, we're going to talk a little about dying. Now, it's something that we don't like to think about, but it's going to happen to all of us eventually, and the people that we love. And soon there's going to be a voluntary, or probably a voluntary assisted dying bill that's coming in. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, so this is why I love the show, because when we have new laws or potential laws that will be coming in, we get to update the listeners so they know what is happening in their own state. So there has been a voluntary assisted dying bill that has been circulated and introduced. It is not law yet, but it is out there for discussion and for consultation. So it's going to go through quite a lengthy implementation period if it is eventually passed. So if it does come into place in Queensland, we're talking about, then we're looking at a potential commencement date of the 1st of January 2023.
It's close.
Yeah, it's not that far away. It's not that far away. So it is going to go through a particular parliamentary committee over the next few months. So we will see some more traction with this. But the idea behind this voluntary assisted dying scheme that they want to introduce into Queensland, I suppose it seems obvious, but what it is it's a scheme to assist particular people suffering from particular conditions in particular circumstances to voluntarily decide that they no longer want to be here.
And the key is that there are criteria involved. You've got to actually meet some fairly specific criteria.
Be eligible.
Yeah, so far what they're talking about that the bill would actually provide is for a person to be eligible, and I'll just read a bit out here from the excerpt I've got. They've got to be diagnosed with a disease, illness or medical condition that is advanced, progressive and will cause death. So not may cause death, but will cause death. So there has to be a certainty in that regard. So that's important with certain diagnoses, as you can perhaps imagine. It's got to be expected to cause death within 12 months. So that's another, particular criteria that they've set out. And it's got to also cause suffering to the person that is intolerable for them. So immediately that tells me that potentially that is a subjective point of view from the person who has the condition, that they're going to have to say and perhaps prove, we don't know yet, that look, this is really intolerable for me. I can't be here anymore for these reasons. So we're going to find out more in due course what that means.
Because I wonder how they would prove such a thing if they're suffering to a certain degree, and what they'd say is, yep, okay, that's enough.
I believe it will be quite heavily supported by medical evidence at the time. So if we continue on with what the eligible criteria at this stage is going to be, the person obviously has to have capacity. So they have to be in a position, just like making a will, making a power of attorney, entering into contracts. You've got to have that mental capacity to understand what you're doing. You can't be in a position where you're not able to make decisions. Very, very important. And it's important to have that set out quite clearly in the legislation down the track, because you can imagine vulnerable people will be taken advantage of.
Highly medicated,
Yeah, exactly right. And that you've got to make sure that there's no coercion.
Yeah, if they're not able to look after their own interests, obviously.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So there's got to be safeguards. And part of those safeguards that they have talked about, which is important, is that the process will involve having 2 medical practitioners, so not just one, but 2 medical practitioners to complete independent assessments of the person. So that's important, because that's a safeguard, isn't it? So you might have a family GP that's known the person for so long, and may or may not have a bias, but then you need to get another medical practitioner. So it's important to have that independent assessment. And you've got to have the person make 3 separate requests for access to this scheme. So it's not going to be good enough for the person to just ask once. And that's going to be a reassurance again to make sure that there is no coercion, that there's not someone else in the background pushing that person. So they have to ask on 3 separate occasions. Okay, and that's good to see in what they're talking about at the moment for safeguards and measures for protection. And the second request has to be in writing and witnessed by 2 independent witnesses. So again, another safeguard measure for their protection. And a waiting period of at least 9 days before the first and the final request. So that's interesting, isn't it? So if you come along to your doctor and say, okay, I want to be part of the scheme, I want it to be over, let's do it. Well, okay, that's the first step, but it's not the final step. You've got to do it 2 more times. You've got to wait a period of 9 days, because the idea is you could change your mind.
Cool. So in reality, I'm bad at math, but that would be at least a month from you going to the first time to the last time, or 9 days each. It's going to be a little bit of a period there before you get an outcome.
Well, at this stage, they're saying 9 days between the first and the final. So at least.
I see.
So, almost 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that perhaps is a decent period, maybe a reasonable period for the person to reconsider, to get other advice, talk to family again. Maybe something else has come up with their diagnosis. I mean, things happen like that all the time, as you can imagine. So it's good to see that they're talking about these safeguard measures.
That's it, and it makes sense, of course, because it literally is a final decision. So you need to be 100% sure of that. What about palliative care, for example?
So palliative care is not going to be. It's not a part of the scheme. So in other words, we don't want to confuse palliative care with this voluntary assisted dying scheme. They are 2 separate things. So it's important for people to realise that if this bill gets passed and laws are made, it does not mean that palliative care is dispensed with. So that's important to understand. People will still have the option, as I understand from this bill, that look, if you want palliative care to end out your days in the best way possible, you will still be able to choose that particular option. But this is just a new scheme introduced, or will be introduced, to take into account other people's wishes in certain circumstances, and those that are eligible to take advantage, if I could quote unquote say take advantage, of what they want to have happen to them in their last days.
And do you know whether the doctors have a choice in this? Because obviously this is such a heavy thing for someone to do. So do all doctors have to be a part of this scheme?
Yeah, it's a good question. My understanding from reading the information so far, and it could change, is that the doctors will have the choice to opt out. So they will actually be able to choose that they don't want to participate in the scheme. So if you go to your GP and they are the one, and your GP has chosen not to participate in the scheme, they still have to assist the person with information as to where they can go to participate in the scheme. They still have to do that as a medical practitioner, but they don't have to choose themselves to participate. And that's an important thing for registered medical practitioners to know.
And just finally, Despina, can anyone try to get this overruled? For example, a family member, could they try to have this decision overruled?
Well, that's the idea with the safeguard measures is you've got to have 3 separate requests. Family members perhaps may have rights to say there was coercion, for example, but that is the reason why there are 3 separate requests that they're talking about. It has to be done on different dates, 2 independent witnesses, 2 different medical practitioners. At the end of the day, if someone does choose to go down that path, that person can always withdraw the request at the last minute, because it is all about them. It's something that they choose to do voluntarily.
Their choice, yeah, of course. That is Despina Priala from Priala Legal talking about the voluntary assisted dying bill possibly rolling out very soon in 2023. So if you're seeking any legal advice or have a question for Despina, you can phone her on 0755291294 or text Despina direct on 0400141269. And of course, you can email us here at breakfast@radio97.com.au. You're listening to Radio 97.